our guest on today's episode of Living Proof, is here to talk about her life story of living in a domestic violent relationship, being a drug addict, and in the domestic violence relationship, it was almost to the point of wanting to murder her partner. She is an author and has produced a 7-minute film about her life. Sally, welcome to Living Proof. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
What an amazing story you've had. It's full of colour and life, and I can't wait to hear it. So let's jump right in.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, where do we start?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, exactly, it sort of sounds exciting, doesn't it? But I suppose at the time, the living of it was maybe not so wonderful. But yes. So I sort of have a tendency, I think, I've explored life to the depths, if that's a way of putting it. I would say of myself that I was a terrible mongrel for a lot of my life, and in this sort of, also in this really toxic relationship with my first husband. But I really wouldn't be able to nail it down to say I had a terrible upbringing or anything like that. I actually had a really nice childhood. So it's this real anomaly in a sense like that. Yeah.
Wow. So tell us, did it all start when you got married, or was there some before marriage where you walked a pretty difficult line?
Yeah, I think sort of after leaving home, for me, I always put it down to probably for myself personally. I was one of those kids who thought about life, the universe and everything. And pretty early on, I had discarded this notion of there being any sort of God or any sort of common, morality, I suppose is the word. So I used to think, well, you might not jump on the beds at your house, but maybe I do. So I put it all down to preference. Yeah. And being maybe a girl of extremes, I don't know, for me that meant that I actually lived that out. So if there is no point or purpose to life, if there is no absolute morality, we might find that some things in other countries are legal that maybe are illegal in our country. So I was really playing with all of that sort of idea, and I threw myself pretty enthusiastically at first into drugs and alcohol and living this, what back then in the day was this really alternative sort of lifestyle. And really the reality is that it became pretty toxic pretty quickly. So I sort of landed there. Really naively, I think, would be the word I'd use now. I think I'd say naive, yeah.
Wow. So you have come out of a domestic violent relationship. So when you got married, did the DV occur pretty much straight up?
I love to use that analogy, that the story of how do you boil a frog? Have you heard that one? Yeah. Because it's not rational, is it? If someone just came up to you and smacked you in the chops or something, that's a technical term. But you would be all, we wouldn't tolerate that. But domestic violence doesn't happen like that. It's very insidious. It happens really slowly. There's sort of almost a mutuality for me. There was. In that, and it's this concept that, you put the frog in the cold water and you just slowly turn up, you just slowly lose your boundaries. You just slowly begin to be saying things to each other or having things spoken over you that you would never put up with in any other. I've been called every filthy thing under the sun that I can think of. There might be a few, but by the person who was my partner, my husband and the father of my children. And so it's a very confusing thing in a sense, because it's not rational. It doesn't seem logical, but it doesn't happen all at once. Otherwise, of course, we wouldn't be there.
So around domestic violence, I'm sure that there's a lot of us out there that don't really understand it, and we have this attitude, because we're so uneducated and so not exposed to it, we have this attitude of, just leave. And it's not that easy. Yeah.
And I think I probably thought that myself. I remember certainly thinking that, you watch movies and you think, why doesn't that woman leave? And yet there I was myself in exactly that environment.
And especially with children as well.
Yes. And so there's an awful lot of shame. It's complex. I think being not having that financial independence is a massive thing for women as well. You've got your kids in, and there's this. I think part of the manipulation of being in those sort of relationships is you've got this person saying it's your fault. If you were a better wife, if you were a better mother, I wouldn't be like this. And again, that doesn't, when you're outside of it, you would see behind that and think, well, that's ridiculous. But when you're in that situation, it was just layers and layers of that, and thinking, oh, if I was just better, if I just kept the kids quiet, if we just would have a good day. And then there is this then they would be all repentant, oh, I'm sorry, and all of that. And you want to believe that. We want to believe, I think we want to believe the best of others.
Oh, absolutely.
To the extreme. So that's to an extreme. And, my husband would say, he would obviously be threatening and say, if you leave me, I'll hunt you down like a dog. And I believed him. I believed that his anger and his dissatisfaction with his own lot in life, or whatever, would take him to that degree where he would hunt me down. And he would say, because you've been in prison, I'll get the kids. So he used the children as a manipulation and I believed that right in the moment. You sort of can't, it's very hard to sort of get your head above water to the extent where you can have a bit of perspective and a bit of outside perspective. And I think, a lot of shame, and like you said before, I was aware that I was doing it wrong. I was aware that probably other people would judge me. And there's a shame around that. And also I actually felt very invisible. That no one really cared about us and no one saw us or saw me or my children, which is sort of what brought me to that point where I thought that to commit murder would be the only way out of this situation.
Wow, you must have just been so incredibly desperate. I mean, as a mother, you've got your mother's heart for your children, wanting to protect them, and also, that self-preservation, trying to protect yourself. I can't even imagine what would have gone through your mind to think that was your only way out. Yeah,
it's really desperate at that point. I mean, we were in an extreme. By that point, Max had sort of put padlocks on the doors, and he dragged an old mattress into the lounge. I wasn't allowed to have people round or over to the house. So there's that isolation, that isolating you from people who might be supportive and offer you support. So the real breaking down of those relationships as well. So we were very much entrapped, like quite physically in this house. And
And was there drug addiction as well? We mentioned right at the beginning that you were a drug addict. Did this impact it?
So that's so we were heroin addicts and alcoholics. So I used to drink a flagon of port a day.
Wow.
And so then I'm not rational either. So I'm contributing. It was a big soupy mess.
Because it's not a rational thought, is it, to think you've got children in the home, being a mother, he's a father, and to think that it's okay to, continue that lifestyle?
No, correct. And I think there's all of those sorts. When I got out of prison, because I'd been in prison previous to having children, and I think when I got out of prison, I sort of wanted to reinvent myself and be straight and conservative. And my best attempt at that was thinking, well, what do straight people do? Well, they have kids. That's what they do. I mean, it just sounds ludicrous now. But, this attempt to sort of live this normal life, but again, where there's no morality and all bets are off. If you can do whatever you like. And so I think for me, having the kids meant that I did begin to think, hang about, you actually can't really just
Yes.
You know, it was very, and I remember probably when I was about 27 looking at my kids and thinking that they were doomed to this lifestyle that myself and their father had created. It was terrible.
Wow.
What we created.
So you did mention before that you were in prison before you had children.
I was using heroin, and when I left home, after leaving home as a kid, you know, and being just in this whole environment of, sex, drugs and rock and roll and all of that, and being very naive and just thinking everything's a party, and it sort of does start as a party. And so I got involved in international drug runners, which is a bit,
wow.
When I say that, it's perhaps maybe everybody doesn't do that, but I did. And it's sort of, I don't want it to seem boasty, because that's sort of weird, isn't it? Except...
Yeah, it's a bit kind of left field.
Yeah, it's a bit left field. But anyway, so the bottom line is that I sold an ounce of heroin to a federal police officer. No,
wow.
You just don't do that. I didn't know it was a federal police officer, but anyway, so I did 16 months in Northfield Women's Prison.
Wow.
Right here in Adelaide. And I would say of that, when I left, I just decided to moderate my behaviour, because I didn't particularly like being in prison, but it didn't inherently change my worldview. So my worldview maintained the same. I still thought, well, if you want to do that, you do that. And if I don't want to do that, or I do want to do that, if there is no... So it didn't change my worldview being in prison. I just thought, well, I'd rather not return. So I moderated my behaviour. So instead of dealing ounces, I just decided to deal grams and have those beautiful children.
Amazing.
Yeah, not rational at all.
No,
but,
no. So if we can jump forward again, I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit here, but you did mention that you contemplated murder.
Yes.
So what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think around that period of time when I was looking at my children and realising that they were sort of the hapless victims of Max and my choices, and really what hope did they have? And combined with Max sort of saying, if you leave me, I'll hunt you down. And like I say, I think probably at that point he was showing the early signs of alcoholic dementia. And I wasn't allowed to leave the house unless I could account for, that I'd be gone for 7 minutes, or I'd be gone for 13 minutes, or whatever it might be. And if I didn't, I was in big trouble when I got back. So I was really in this terribly desperate place, and I'd given up drugs under this whole banner of, if I could just do it better, if I was a better wife, if I was a better mother. And so I'd sort of done those things and it didn't change. So he was passed out on the floor, on the mattress, this one night, and I thought I would just smother him with a pillow. I remember thinking at the time that it would be the perfect crime, because I thought no one cares or even sees us, in this situation. Anyway, so I was sort of there, and I think two things occurred to me. One, I thought that's rather extreme. And then probably more than anything, I thought if I didn't succeed in actually killing him, then it would be really terrible.
Yeah.
He would be really angry. So I sort of, I did this super weird thing for me, which was I remember saying, if there's a God, you better do something, or tomorrow he gets it.
Yeah.
Which is not very reverent of me, but nonetheless, that was, these days we would say that's a crisis prayer. Anyway, the following day, I planned that I would leave the house, and I had permission to leave, and I thought I would buy enough heroin to put in his drink and just overdose him. And I thought that was perfect, because I just thought no one's going to care if an old drug addict dies of a heroin overdose in Adelaide. And interestingly enough, or whatever you want to do with this story, but I literally bumped into someone on the street who who knew me, but didn't know anything about my situation or what I was going through, who basically invited me to church. And I remembered that irreverent prayer from the night before, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe there's something in this. So I went home and I said to Max, I was going to kill you today, but I think maybe we'll go to church instead.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's ludicrous, actually, isn't it? But I went to church that Sunday. That was the Saturday that I was going to kill him, and on the Sunday I went to church and I heard the gospel. I heard the good news of Jesus.
Wow.
Even though I was particularly, that here I was, this wretched mongrel, really, and that God, we've heard it, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. We sort of know it off by rote, don't we? But I heard it, that God, in that moment when I was at my most disgusted, when I knew I'd failed everything, I was a failure. I knew it. I was a failure as a wife. I was a failure as a mother. I was a failure as a daughter. I was a terrible citizen. And I knew it, even by my own, what I wanted to achieve in myself. I was a failure to myself. And yet, in that moment, in my most stinking moment, that God would say, I love you enough that I will send my son to pay the price for all of your wretchedness.
Amazing. So was that your turning point
100%.
to coming into that place of freedom, like where you are now?
Yes, 100%. Because now, unlike when I'd left prison where my worldview didn't change at all, now my worldview changed. Now something internally had happened where I went, oh, maybe there is a point and purpose, and if there is, then isn't that worth exploring?
Yeah. Before we go, I just wanted to touch base on your book. So you're an author and you've written a book. Let me show you. It's called As Black from White. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so the book really sprung out of the story of the woman at the well who had an encounter with Jesus and then went and told her town. And so, of course, I was that crazy Christian, sorry everybody, when I first sort of received this message, I wanted to tell everyone. I still do, but I'm hoping that I'm a little more subtle about it. I don't know. And so I think the book was just an extension of that. How can we tell people, and we've just had some beautiful feedback from people, from addicts and people who are going through those sorts of situations themselves, to sort of feel heard as well, where they can resonate with the story and feel heard and be able to share that story. And I think too, for me, a big part of it was not robbing God of his glory.
Yeah.
To sort of go, maybe if I walked in a room now, you wouldn't necessarily pick me as a criminal who might murder me, but I don't ever want to rob God of his glory. To say this is actually, and to encourage people that if you see someone sitting in the gutter, literally, I remember going and I'd go in the streets looking for cigarette butts to smoke. If you see someone doing that, to maybe take that moment to realise that God sees them too.
Yeah.
And he loves them immensely.
Yeah.
So the book's all about that.
Amazing. And you made a short film as well. Tell us quickly about that.
7-minute short film we did with uni SA students. So beautifully proud of it. So you can jump on the website, you can jump on YouTube, Sally Graham YouTube, and you can watch that for free.
Excellent. So if people want to buy the book, where do they go?
asblackfromwhite.com.au.
Excellent, on your website.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah.
Sally, thank you so much for joining us today. What an incredible story.
Thank you. Yes.
Join us next time on Living Proof.